Hi everyone, and welcome to Jane Talks Murder, where I'll be talking about and reviewing an episode of Poirot, Murder, She Wrote, Diagnosis Murder, or Jonathan Creek. Today, I'm looking at Murder, She Wrote, Prediction Murder, or as I like to call it, that time I predicted the ending. We begin the episode with Jessica nervously flying over the landscape, and she asks this guy about his son, who has married someone into the astral plane. Now we're suddenly on the ground, where Jessica meets housekeeper Greta and Jill, who is all over her aura, and lets slip that Lee has the hots for her, before rushing off to meditate. Dell comes home, happy to see Jessica, and now we're at a party where Catherine and Ben get snippy with each other, before Jill rambles on about her exoplasmic spirit, and Lee spies Roy by the fireplace, who complains that Dell hasn't fixed the fence and the cattle have escaped. A helicopter lands in the garden and hey, it's that guy who was that maybe vampire in the Legend of Borby House. But here he is Francesco, a suave psychic Dell hired as a surprise for Jill. Jessica's face calls bullshit. He points out Jessica's hidden locket and tells Catherine where to find her mother's ring when she loses it next year, before focusing on Jill. He predicts that she will have a constricted throat, but will be saved by a friend. She'll fall off a carousel and then will feel overpowered. No! Alright, calm down, dude. Dell wants answers. Francesco says he saw death in a fire, and Jessica looks like she's about to use Jill's hair as a pillow. The next day, Jessica tells Jill Francesco's predictions are nonsense, right before Jill starts choking, so Jessica saves her, and Jill is ecstatic. Later on, Jill wants to go riding, even though Roy warns her against it, and she complains to Dell that everyone keeps laughing at her, and rides off annoyed. Lee invites Jess to fly to dinner and other activities.
I sure don't like waking up in an empty bed.
Wow! But Jess shoots him down before she spots Jill's horse with no rider, and they rush off to investigate, only to find Jill unconscious. Okay, let's hold it there. My prediction is that Francesco and Jill are in cahoots. Francesco made up the visions, which Jill is now faking in order to kill someone, probably Dell, in a fire, because he's having an affair with Catherine. I'm locking in my answer. Back home, Jill rants on about the fire and wants to see Francesco to find out more, which Lee can't be bothered to deal with, and Dell can't get hold of Francesco. Lee apologizes to Jill for calling her a nutcase, and she leaves to tell Catherine her feelings, before Jessica tells Lee she's booked an early flight home because she's not interested in his D, but he takes it rather well in a heartfelt conversation. Lee pokes the fire before Francesco shows up with his pointy finger, and then Catherine shows up saying Jill never came to see her, and the two visitors eyeball one another. Lee and Dell go out looking for Jill, while Francesco tells the girls she's not out there, which the boys confirm when they get back. Jessica passes the time grilling Francesco hard about his antics, before Dell comes in and threatens him right before the phone rings with a ransom demand which Lee agrees to pay. However, he does ring Roy to bring some guns. While Dell is out making the drop, Jess points out it's odd the kidnappers knew how much money Lee had and picked a familiar drop-off point. But with the drop successful, Jill calls saying she's coming home. Dramatic zoom. Jill's car flips off the road, which has now been incinerated, and everyone is sad, while Francesco rummages around Jill's stuff, which Jess sasses him down for. The police show up and say the brakes on the car had been tampered with, while at the funeral parlor, Catherine strokes on Dell in front of her husband, and this is awkward. Hella awkward. Jess speculates that the ransom demand was pre-recorded, so it could have been Dell or Francesco, who is now being grilled by the police for having another identity, which comes with a criminal past. So he says Dell told him to make the predictions. Dell admits he told him to make up some crap about their marriage so Jill would divorce him, but Francesco flipped the script, which is why Dell was angry that night. Jessica is bothered by the whole thing and shows the lieutenant the book Francesco tried to take, which says go to dentist, or maybe even G-O to dentist.
Greta Olsen, the Swedish maid.
Holy crap, I'd completely forgotten about her. Jess says to release Francesco, who rushes to the airport where he's intercepted by the police along with his wife, Jill. Ha ha ha, gotcha! Jessica explains to Lee that Jill switched Greta's dental records with hers to fake her death with Greta's body to make off with Lee's money. The episode ends with Jess promising Lee if she's ever ready for a relationship, she'll give him a call. Boom! Nailed it! And I worked it out the same way Jess did. Mystical stuff has never been canon in the show, so in order for the predictions to come true, Francesco and Jill had to be in it together. I didn't get the correct victim. In fact, the murder was kind of secondary to the kidnapping, and I forgot all about Greta. I thought it was Catherine in the car, so I was surprised when she turned up at the funeral home for an unnecessarily awkward scene. This was a clever little episode on the whole, with lots of elements to it and clues to follow along with an interesting through line about Jessica and Lee. Jessica is portrayed throughout the show as a single, independent woman, but a love life has been hinted at from time to time, and I think here it's handled very gracefully. I love Jessica as a character. She handles everything so well, but she takes no shit either. I just love her and this show. While this was a cool, clever little episode, there were a few tweaks I would have made. The editing was a little all over the place. There were some random cuts between scenes that were jarring, as well as some shots lingering for too long, which were a little distracting in places. Also, there were quite a few characters and plot points that were redundant, but even more so because it seemed like they were set up for something that amounted to nothing. Catherine and Ben were odd. I'm not even sure who they were exactly, and Ben particularly didn't do anything. There were hints that there was something between Catherine and Dell which didn't come to fruition, as Dell's reasoning for wanting to end his marriage was him and Jill just weren't a good fit. It had nothing to do with Catherine. Catherine wasn't even used as the body bluff like I thought. It was Greta who was perhaps forgettable by design, which made the reveal work better. Roy was just sort of there. There was an odd story point where Dell said he'd fix the fence, and then Roy told Lee he didn't, and the cattle got out, and I question what it had to do with anything. You know what it feels like? These were all setups for a wider story in a two-part episode, but it ended up being a single episode, and they forgot to take the unused plot points out. I rarely say this, but this episode could have done with being longer, especially with the murder being secondary to the rest of the plot, to allow the story time to breathe. But what we got was still enjoyable throughout. We have one victim, Greta Olson, who was killed to be used as a body decoy by our killer, Jill Goddard, who wanted to ditch her husband, take Lee's money, and run off with her accomplice, Francesco. So there you have it. That was Prediction Murder. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or come say hi on social media. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit that like button, it really does mean a lot, or consider subscribing if you want to keep investigating with me. Alternatively, feel free to check out my other YouTube channels. Thank you so much for watching, I'll speak to you soon, and keep an eye out for clues.